Ladies and gentlemen, please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is item number 1. I'm going to read it in. Tax proposal public meeting to solicit information and suggestions from the public in regards to possible adjustments to our current taxing methods and matters related thereto.
Motion to begin said tax proposal public meeting.
Second.
We have a motion second to begin. All in favor?
Aye.
Ladies and gentlemen, I thought we would start off. We have people that want to sign, that have already signed up to speak. But I thought we'd start off by allocating 15 minutes to everybody, and we'll just see how it goes. If there's not a lot of interest and somebody that's already spoke for 15 minutes wants to speak again, we'll entertain that. I think it's a fair way to do it. But I think if we start off giving those who want to speak an allocated 15 minutes to speak, I think we can, there should be an adequate amount of time for most things to come out. But if you have some afterthoughts later on and we have the time to do it, we'll entertain bringing you back up here again. Okay, first paper I have is from John Bagwell. John? Name and address when you come up, please, at the mic. That's okay, John, take your time.
John Bagwell, 587 Tuckerman Avenue, Middletown. And I'm speaking here, first of all, I'm a member of MEDAC, and I'm speaking, though, as a private citizen. The reason is I'm adding some points that go beyond the MEDAC letter, or the letter from Bob Silver.
You can hear him fine? Okay, good.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I'm adding points that may go beyond the letter that you received from Bob Silva, chairman of our committee.
Okay.
Therefore, I'm speaking as a private citizen, not as a representative of MEDAC. First of all, we have there are three proposals in the MEDAC letter which you've received. And this reflects the need to make Middletown housing more affordable for those who either buy as a permanent resident or rent as a permanent, wants to be a resident. And the second need we're addressing is to promote the stability of neighborhoods and the increase of Middletown's year-round residents for both achieving community and neighborhood health. So those are the needs that we're addressing. And we're doing this through we're proposing 3 steps. One is supporting families interested in residing, purchasing or renting in Middletown through a homestead exemption. That would shift the burden, tax burden, from those who are living here full-time, either as renters or as residents, to those families who are part-time residents. Secondly, by disincentivizing the use of residential properties for purely short-term rentals. And third, a third proposal would support the older, long-term residents on fixed incomes who are facing a burden of higher taxes by amending the tax freeze, which is now in the books. First of all, to make homes more affordable, we would do this by reducing the tax on families, the primary residents, to the homestead exemption, and by shifting the burden to the families that are not primary residents. So this is the concept that you've all familiar with. There have been others promoting the homestead exemption, and we simply want to show our support. The second item, though, the second proposal addresses short-term rentals. And I have a memo that I put together to help me understand this is a very complicated area. Who's renting, whether they're living on the property, whether they're an investor. And I have a memo which I asked Karen to distribute. Have you distributed that memo?
We have it.
You have that, okay. I put it together yesterday to help me understand the information and basically the process. But it is something else. I've asked the question, well, how many short-term rentals are there? And how many short-term rentals are owned by out-of-state investors? And yesterday, thanks to the efforts of Karen, I found that information out. So for the first time, we see this. And basically, what it shows is there are 285 short-term rentals in Middletown. Now, there may be more, but this is the number that are registered. And you've retained an agency that will help find out if there are other short-term rentals that are not listed. And the next thing we found out, that there were 100 of these short-term rentals that are basically where they've retained an agent. Now, perhaps they've retained an agent because they live on the island and they can't, and they don't want to handle this, or they live here part-time and it's their full-time residence. But we found that 82 of these agents are owned by people from out of state. Now, how do we know that? Because if you're an out-of-state resident that owns purchased a property as a short-term rental, you've got to file a form with the state. And that's filed here at our town clerk's office. They have a copy. So we found out that of the 100 that have agents, 82 are short-term, are people who from the out-of-state who own these properties. Now, why is this important? Why are we concerned about this? Well, I'll cite a specific example, and you don't make rules based upon perhaps individual actions, but I think it's indicative of what's happening. And that is, I found this in Newport. I heard about it in Newport on the Point. There was a fellow who owned a family who owned a property, and it's been a long-term rental for years. And he did some calculations and found out that he could make a lot more money putting it on the market and registering it as a short-term rental. So there was a property taken off the market for somebody who would reside here full-time, and now it's a short-term rental. So basically, and I've also talked to a couple of brokers who've said that the economics, especially in Middletown, of people who are buyers interested in short-term rentals, leads them to pay a lot more for a property in a good location than somebody who simply wants to live there or own it for the purposes of renting the property. So what this is doing, it's taking houses off the market that would normally be lived in by people who want to make it their primary residence, home, or as a rental property. Now, we're addressing this problem by simply making it more costly, by applying the commercial tax rate to the, rather than the residential tax rate, to these properties. And this would raise the revenue by about 30%. Now, we were asked several months ago to offer opportunities to raise long-term predictable revenue. So this is a side effect, and would raise, we estimate, $100,000 to $200,000 at least in a year if you applied this commercial rate to those properties. Now, there are a lot of unintended consequences. For example, somebody pointed out that she knows of a family that lives in Texas, but the family has owned the house for years. So they're out-of-state resident, they have an agent, and this is not an investment property. This is property they'd like to retire to someday. So pretty clearly, when MEDAC wrote this, and we said it should be applied, we recommended it to be applied to short-term rentals that are not owner-occupied. Well, if you have a broad net, it would catch that family. So it's going to require some thought on the part of the town council to determine exactly who they want to apply this to. And in fact, in this case, perhaps you'd find the reason to accept that sort of thing. So granted, this is not a clear, everybody gets caught. Now, the other thing, I think there's been some misunderstanding, and that is that this would apply to families who might want to have, rent out a couple of rooms or 3 or 4 rooms in their house. Well, first of all, if it's only 2 rooms, doesn't even require registering, because I've been told that that is falls under a rooming house rule. So but if you have another house on the property, or you have 3 rooms, and you live there, clearly we're not interested in that. But we're interested in suggesting that you apply the tax to properties that have been purchased for the purpose of investing and for the purpose of making it a short-term rental. And the third item that we're looking at is modifying, as George Durgan has said, making the tax freeze more robust. Now, we have in the books a tax freeze right now. Basically, if a person, but the income test is so low that I don't know, I said to George, how many people qualify? He said, I don't know, but it's not very many. And so we have proposed that you make it, quote, more robust by raising the income level, and that this would apply to the older, longer-term, long residents on fixed incomes. Granted, that it would take some time for George. People have to apply, and George would have to, you'd have to have certain guidelines. But there's one difference here. Today, if you qualify for a tax freeze, and there's a certain amount of taxes that you're not paying, that's kind of forgiven. What we're proposing is that this become something of a, quote, reverse mortgage, and that the tax freeze become a lien against your property, and that ultimately somebody's got to pay that tax. And if it's paid by the other taxpayers, this becomes a lien and will accumulate at an interest rate typical of perhaps a approach of a home equity line. Not a home equity line, but a reverse mortgage. So basically, those were the 3 proposals which we believe would increase the affordability of housing for people who'd like to live here full-time and make more housing available. So any questions, I'll be happy to answer them, but thank you for the opportunity to explain it.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Okay, Lawrence Frank, Lawrence?
Lawrence Frank, 8 O'Donnell Road, Middletown. Thank you, Mr. Bagwell. I'm going to repeat some of your suggestions. Property taxes are assessed in 2 broad categories, residential and commercial. Homeowners who live here year-round pay property taxes, income taxes, and contribute to the economic health of the local economy. Rental properties, being year-round rentals, Airbnb-type rentals, or rentals outside of any established rental business, all generate income for their owners. They all allow income to be generated with limited tax consequences. They are businesses, yet their properties are taxed at the residential rate. This needs to change. Any property that generates rental income should be taxed at the commercial rate. These are money-making enterprises, and they should be taxed as such. As an aside, all short-term rentals, such as Airbnb, should be required to have the owner of the property living on the premises. Absentee owners should be prohibited from offering short-term rentals. Over 50% of the housing stock in Middletown are rentals, a percentage that is increasing every year. There is a large pool of money that the town should access. The council should direct the town administrator, the finance director, and the tax assessor to determine the number and type of rentals there are in Middletown. From that study, the town can fully understand the financial impact of the tax proposal I have spoken about. I believe the tax amount would be substantial. There are over 1,500 hotel and motel rooms in Middletown and more than 250 Airbnb rooms as well. Middletown should adopt a $1 a night occupancy tax. It should be identified as a public safety tax. The tax should be dedicated to the expenses related to public safety, specifically fire and police. The money should be used to address the staffing issues of both the fire department and the police department. The money collected should not be used to offset any other item in the town budget, nor reduce current or future fire and police budgets. Assuming 1,750 rooms, the yield would be about $750 a night, Based on a 100% occupancy, that would mean annual receipts of about $640,000. Based on a 50% occupancy, that would bring in $320,000. These additional revenues would go a long way to quieting the unfortunate ongoing hostilities we have recently witnessed, and would benefit the town long into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Council Lombardi?
So, to address a couple of things, to go back to Mr. Bagwell for a minute, the Airbnb and the several platforms, I think Airbnb has just bought another platform, so they're no longer just by themselves. Yeah, no problem.
Go ahead.
So I just wanted to address the Airbnb issue. Airbnb has bought up another platform, so they're actually on multiple platforms. One of the problems with revenue with Airbnb, and I've gotten to be a little bit more educated on this since sitting on the board of Discover Newport. So Councilor Napolitano from Newport and I have a resolution that's going to be going to all 9 communities that are on Discover Newport that cover the 2 counties, and probably statewide. We're going to send it to our legislators that are going to ask the state to do an audit of Airbnb, because what happens is when we get our check from Airbnb, or when the city of Newport collects their money, and you ask Airbnb, where is the money coming from? So you want to identify who's paying the tax. Meaning, if you have a house, you rent it out through Airbnb, you pay the tax. Airbnb collects that tax and remits it to the state of Rhode Island. But Airbnb has refused to tell the state of Rhode Island or the communities who's paying the tax. If we knew that, then we could easily identify the properties that are renting out and that are not registered and are not paying the tax. It would make it a little bit easier from that standpoint. So that resolution, I have it, I'm going to submit it for the next town council docket so that we can get it to our legislators. I believe that the Department of Business Regulation actually has to do this. It's not an act of the legislature. We've just got to get them to agree to do it for us. But I think Middletown and Newport, if you look at the stats, I have them, I'm happy to show it to you, are the 2 communities that are being affected the most. Maybe Providence, I'm not sure. But we are the 2 biggest. It's a lot of money. And I'll tell you, I just heard 250, it's up over 300. Based on some of the figures that Evan Smith is giving us from Discover Newport. They have a thing called AirDNA that I can share with everyone if they'd like to see it, that we get on a monthly basis. And there's more than 250 in Middletown, to be honest with you. And we're losing out on revenue. There's revenue that's not coming in. So we need to address that. As far as, Lawrence, you're instituting a fee or a tax, I believe, and I could be wrong, but I think that I don't know if we can do that. I think that may have to be an act of the legislature, correct?
You would need enabling legislation
We need
from the
enabling
state to do that.
legislature to do that. So the town can't, God, if we could, it'd be great, but we can't. Well, I know, that's why I'm saying it. I've got a captive audience right now, and they need to be a little more proactive on this, because last year there was something done up at the legislature on Airbnb, but it's becoming a real problem, and we need to get their attention on this. I think that's it. I've got some other stuff, but that'll come later. Thank you.
Could I just have a question for Peter? It's my understanding that a town has the authority to establish 4...
Mr. Bagwell, please
Sorry?
talk into the mic,
Okay.
okay?
That the town has the authority to establish 4 different taxes. They have vehicle, they have furniture or whatever, fixtures, they have a commercial rate, and they have a residential rate. So what we're talking about here is not creating a 5th tax. What we're talking about here is basically taking their commercial rate and identifying properties that, in the opinion of George Durgan, the assessor, are commercial.
Well, it's not quite as simple as that, because while the town has the ability to create different tax classifications, there's a limited menu of those classifications in the state law that the town can pick from. And there are also definitions in the state law as to what is a residential property and what's a commercial property. So for example, a residential property is defined as residential real estate containing no more than 5 dwelling units. So if I have a house that has 5 dwelling units in it, and I do all of them as short-term Airbnb rentals, that still fits within the definition of a residential property under the state law. So if the town were to say we're going to set up a separate classification for those properties that engage in short-term rentals, in my opinion, we'd need to get some enabling legislation passed in order to do that.
Over 5, or with?
Over 5 units, which is rare
Okay.
in our community, can be classified as commercial. But the typical 1 or 2 or 3 unit Airbnb rental property would still be classified and defined under state law as a residential property. So if you're going to treat that as a commercial property, in my opinion, we'd need to get some enabling legislation passed.
Now, we've asked George if, I said, well, does this mean then that we have a commercial property in a residential zone? Because clearly there's a house. No, you don't.
No.
So what
Not from a zoning standpoint.
That's right. This has nothing to do with zoning, and all right, well, that's why we're here, to get what the attorney
Yep.
has to.
So, I mean, once the town comes up with a strategy in terms of what it wants to do, the next step, very likely might be putting together some proposed legislation for the local delegation to take to the State House.
Okay.
Mr. Bagwell,
Yes.
oh, you done?
Go ahead, go ahead.
Mr. Bagwell, while you're up there, and I know you're here as Mr. John Bagwell, but you're also part of the MEDAC committee,
Yes.
okay? Why does the MEDAC, or what was the logic behind the MEDAC committee suggesting that we target only short-term rental investment properties, and it would only apply to not occupied by the owner or a member of the owner's family?
Well, first of all, within the mission statement for MEDAC is to encourage housing and where people can afford to live on the island and therefore work here. So it fits within, I don't have the exact mission statement, but we looked at that first. And then the question is, why don't we just apply this to everybody, to all short-term rentals? And the answer is, well, let's take a look at that, how this would, there's unintended, well, one of the consequences would be, there's a family that might have 2 rooms, which they rent during the summer to supplement their income. And you say, okay, you could tax that. And I mean, you can do whatever you want to. But I think, again, you look at the impact on the community. And we're really concerned about that's now a residence. People are living there. And that's terrific. And perhaps that income that they're getting from having it listed on the, and registered as a short-term rental for some short period of time permits that people to own that house and live there. So we're saying that that wouldn't be consistent with the goal of making housing affordable. Because, I mean, that's a reason why you wouldn't apply it to that group. Somebody had suggested, well, why don't we apply this to all investment properties, including rentals? Problem there. Matter of fact, that was my first suggestion. As Ron Wolanski pointed out, well, council can do whatever he wants. But if you raise the tax on somebody who's renting the property out, owns it as a regular rental, that's going to decrease the affordability of housing. I said, yeah, absolutely right. And that's not the groups anyway.
I don't know if I agree with that logic.
Okay.
And I'm going to tell you where I stand, and I happen to own other properties in Middletown that I rent.
Yeah.
I believe if you own a piece of property and you rent that piece of property, whether it's 1 day or 365 days a year, then you should be paying a commercial tax rate.
Well,
And I can say that as a person that's doing it.
no,
Because you know something? When we try to get too fine with trying to identify it, that's where we lose sight of everything. And that's where we open the doors for, we don't have total control. Bad enough we don't have total control with how we lease properties now in the town of Middletown. How many properties you think get leased every summer here by word of mouth? Private emails to people. I bet you there's 50 or 75 of those that we're not even taking into consideration, that we're automatically losing from. We're going after Airbnb, rightfully so, to identify them, but at the same token, because it's a business for them. How about the independent people that are leasing properties out or rooms out independently that we can't track? Those are the ones that we have to start looking at, because they're the ones that cause problems. I mean, a lot of the Airbnb, in all fairness to them, I see more control in the properties that they lease than I see in private properties that get leased. You know, with parties and with turning places into party houses or known party houses or known areas of parking issues or noise issues. I just see that differently. But going back to properties, if somebody owns several houses in the town of Middletown and they're renting these houses out, and it could be year leases with people, it could be long-term leases with people, they should be, in my opinion only, they should be taxed at a commercial rate.
That was my initial proposal, to be perfectly honest. We're saying, fine, council may approve it, but do you understand what's going to happen?
I don't believe that.
Nope.
I don't believe his assessment of that.
All right.
I really don't. Because you know something? A lot of these people that come in and they lease properties for a year or so, could be military coming here, stationed here for a while, could be people attending the war college, could be a number of people coming here work assignments for a year over to Nusk or places like that, or people that just don't have the money right now to buy their own home. They're leasing homes. So why shouldn't the person that's receiving that rental income pay at a commercial rate? I just don't understand the logic of
Well-
not being there.
It's basically looking at the consequences, and MEDAC's thought was, let's start on those that are I wouldn't say egregiously, but clearly, that would have no impact on the affordability of housing. As a matter of fact, it would have a positive impact on the affordability of housing of those who want to live here and rent here. So we'll focus this just on basically the Airbnb short-term rentals that are at basically investment properties, and it would be up to you, the council, to define this. You could start there, and that would have that would have only a positive impact on the affordability of housing. Now, logically, you could certainly say, well, I own a house or property, and it's a full-time rental. So isn't that an investment property? I said, you're right. And you could put the commercial, it's certainly commercial, certainly investment property, but it would also increase, not necessarily would, but it could lead, the owner would say to the renter, sorry guys, my tax has just gone by X dollars and I'm raising my rent. Now, maybe it's driven by market forces, and market forces say, you can't get away with that. So, but on the other hand, it would have the possibility of making housing less affordable. And our goal here is to increase affordability of housing. Logically, I agree with you, but then you look at the consequence as you, that's where we are.
Okay, and we all have our positions on it. I just think it's, I just think it's not a fair way to do it. And I try to look across the board and say, what's fair to everybody? What's fair to the average taxpayer in the town of Middletown, who's in their own home, trying to stay in their own home, trying to afford to stay in their own home? And the person that, you have people that own properties, that are renting properties, not necessarily because they need the income, but that maybe they're renting it to hold it on to family members to give away down the street, put it into a trust. There's a multitude of things, but while you're generating revenue from a piece of property, you should be taxed at a commercial rate. My opinion only.
No,
I think it simplifies it. I think it makes it fair. And you know, if somebody wants to come in and buy a piece of property to rent it, then they buy it and they rent it, and they pay a commercial rate. If they own it, they want to maintain it, then they pay a commercial rate on it.
I can't
If they're
disagree with that.
generating revenue, they should be held accountable for the revenue that is generated.
As I said, I started out with that position, I looked at the
So you got
consequence.
swayed, huh?
I got swayed and persuaded. There we are. Thanks for your time. Yes.
Mr. Bagwell, stay right there. Mr. President, may I ask a question?
Go right ahead.
Mr. Bagwell, on number 3, you listed some facts, registrations, with or without an agent. Where did you get those figures from?
Karen, yesterday.
I'm sorry?
Karen, at the town clerk's
Oh,
office.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, frankly, I'll be perfectly honest. I had people say, well, the numbers are well over 300, and most of these are owned by out-of-state people. I said, well, do we have some hard facts and figures?
Yes.
Karen said, well, yeah. So I said, well, at the risk of asking you, he says, well, as a public citizen, you can make a request. I said, okay, I'm requesting it, but you don't have to do it right now. She says, well, I'll try to get it done. So 3 cheers and blessings to Karen. And an hour and a half later, I got a phone call and she said, here are the numbers. And you can't make decisions without numbers, and at least this is a starting point.
Thank you, Mr. Bagwell.
Okay, thank you.
Council Lombardi.
So, Mr. Bagwell, hang on. I will put you in touch with Evan Smith. He can give you hard numbers, real numbers. He's got numbers not just for Rhode Island, he's got numbers nationwide. That I think you will be surprised when you see what's going on in Middletown.
Well, go ahead, I'm sorry.
And I'll put you in touch with Evan over at
Okay, good.
Discover Newport.
Now, these are numbers just for people that have filed. We're not saying that.
It's the Airbnb platform, and it's.
Oh, I
and it's
know.
Pretty. I'm
Well,
telling you,
I
the
can
numbers are
imagine.
more than- That's one thing. The other thing is, so to Bob's point about taxing commercially for long-term rentals, I've talked to 2 pretty well-established realtors who've been on this island for a long time, and I asked them that question, and they both gave me the same answer, independently in different rooms, that they believe that the rents will be what the market can bear. That's their answer. Because I was concerned about that. I was concerned about the fact that, hey, if I got a house and I'm renting it out, 3 bedrooms, $2,000 a month, whatever, my taxes go up because they're going to tax me commercially, that I may have to raise my rent. And they both said to me, it will happen mostly because of what the market will bear. And I think you mentioned that.
I guess when I planned to come in with that and offered that to MEDAC, I said, you can reach too far. So we decided to focus on something that was we thought more obvious.
So I don't.
Anyway, I've
I
taken
don't tend
enough
to
of your
disagree
time.
with you to a
Pardon me?
degree. I don't, I'm sorry. I don't tend to disagree with you to a certain degree, because I still believe that every time someone goes and takes a rental off the market, a long-term rental to become an Airbnb because they can make more money in a shorter period of time, we lose workforce housing.
You're
That's what we
absolutely
lose.
right. That's why we're
Is what we
involved.
lose. We lose
Yeah.
workforce housing.
You're right.
And we're desperate in this town for workforce housing because young people can't establish themselves here. And right now, they can't afford to buy a house. So I think we have to take that into consideration. I've got some statistics here that I'll bring up later that show that, Rhode Island, MSNBC in July, okay, last in the country to be business friendly, 50th, all right? The last 10 years, we've been 50th 4 times. We've been 49th and 48th twice. The last 2 years, we've been ranked 45th, and this year we were ranked 50th. And one of the things they identified was the
Affordability.
affordable housing,
Yeah.
and the economic climate in this state.
Anyway,
There's a problem. There's a real problem. And this data is real. We're not business friendly here. We make it's onerous. There are fees, there are taxes. It takes people a long time to establish businesses. It's not good. And I don't care what anybody tells you. Okay, we're not small business friendly in this state. And something's got to change.
well, anyway,
Something needs to change, and needs to change fast, because it's affecting us in Middletown. I went to 3 new business starts in Middletown, small businesses, last month. 200 Quinnipiac Avenue, 1 on Valley Road. And they all said the same thing. Holy mackerel, how does anybody start a business in this state? So when we're talking about housing, well, guess what? Those businesses bring people that want to live here.
Well, this would address, this hopefully would increase the affordability of housing in Middletown. Anyway, thank you for your
Council
time.
Toronto?
I'm here to ask the questions, but I.
No, I'm good. Thank you for your presentation. I
Thanks
just wanted
very
to,
much.
just a couple observations. To try to take a broad brush and say that this will not increase rents. It will increase rents. It will increase rents. I just heard that we're like the worst in business in Rhode Island, and we're looking to put a tax on small businesses. That's what I'm hearing. You're gonna call all these residential places businesses, and then we're gonna levy a tax on them, when I just heard we're the worst place in Rhode Island, in the nation to do business. That's just my challenge. Those are things that spin in my head. I don't think we have a taxing issue. I think we have a spending issue. I was thinking about this. I'm like, you know what? We're talking about, again, finding ways to generate revenue because we feel these people are making a lot of money. So we should be able to tax them a little bit more because they're a business. Well, there's a lot of reasons why people do this. Some do it for business. Some people do it to stay in their homes. So I like it. It's tax reform. I'm all for tax reform. I have rental properties. My family has rental properties. We've been here for 5 generations. Our property over on Alston Ave and Center Ave is low-income housing. I know the numbers that my father's running, and it's barely paying for itself and helping support him to live in Middletown. If you raise the taxes, he will need to raise his rents, and those people will have to move out. So those are the things that you have to take into consideration when you make these decisions. So don't just look at it as these people are running to the bank with a bunch of money. There are some people who are doing that. But there are other people who are trying to stay in their homes, trying to keep their properties. They do want to pass it on. I don't know why it's a problem that they want to pass it on to their kids. Is that a problem that people actually want to hold on to their properties so they can give it to their families? If that's a problem, we've got a lot of conversation to have. Really. So we should be doing everything we can to help the seniors and the veterans. We should help the people who want to live here full-time. We should help businesses. Businesses need a break as much as our residents need a break. And the last thing we need to make sure of as well is that, and everyone's going to say, oh, here he goes, it needs to be predictable. You need to know what your tax burden is going to be on the roof of your house. You know that I can look forward and say, if I do all these things right, I will be able to stay in my home. So whatever solutions you come up with, those are the things I like to see addressed. Seniors, veterans, full-time residents, and predictability. So I'm all excited about today. I've been studying this tax stuff for 6 years. So I'm excited. I want to hear more ideas. Thank you.
Is there anybody in the audience you'd like to come up and say something? Come up to the podium, your name and address, please.
My name is Kate Sarah. I'm at 1372 Wapping Road. And I happen to be here because I do have an Airbnb. So I just wanted to share my perspective because I do think there's other people like me. I'm starting a small business this year. My husband and I have no income. We've had an Airbnb on our property, so we're there. We supervise every guest, and it's absolutely lovely. But what it does for me, and it's only seasonal, because you can't, it's so difficult to rent off-season. I've tried the Navy base, I've tried the schools to get students from September to May. That's very difficult. It's not that easy. And I have a beautiful, well-designed place, so it's not cheap. And so I rent in the summer, and what that helps me do is pay my taxes. It pays, any renovations on my property. If you go by my property, you'll see that my husband and I are constantly updating it, and it's a beautiful property on Wapping Road, and we take a lot of pride in our home and our place. My dad has done so much work there, and I want this property to go to my children. And that's why we do this Airbnb to survive. And with putting more taxes, all that I'm going to do is just pass it on to guests. I mean, because I can't afford to pay it. And if they start paying more, then that's not going to become so desirable because they're going to start going to the hotels. The idea behind the guests coming to my property is it's affordable for them to bring their families in the summer. I have a lot of guests that love to come back. They love the relationships that we have with them. And that's beauty because we're bringing people back to the island to spend money. They're contributing to our economy, and that's really important. Now, granted, I know not everybody on the island does it the same way. Okay, I have a very unique experience. But again, if we put more taxes on this, and then how does my property get taxed? I live in one building, and I have a separate building. That we converted. It was converted when I bought it, but we updated it. Pardon me?
How many rooms?
In the building we rent, it's 2 bedrooms. So 4 maximum. And literally, I've thrown people out if there's more. We are very cognizant of our community and our neighborhood. I mean, we really are. It's so important to me. And I mean, I drill down on these conversations with people on who's coming and why. And I do all of my paperwork here. I put it in my taxes. I mean, is there a way that people can show you your taxes to see who's paying and who's
Do you have
not?
one rental?
One rental. I have another one, but we only rent it for like 1 or 2 weeks. Our house, when we go on vacation, we rent our house, but we know who's staying in there. Typically, it's friends there in my property if we're on vacation. But it's really the other unit because that's the one that we use as our Airbnb, okay? But again, I can't rent it typically from September to May. I would love to and have somebody in there all season to help offset expenses. It's not as easy as you think it is because I try. I'm on nursing, these nurses that come around for 3 months, it's a whole nother area, a whole nother business model. I go to the students. So it's not as easy. So when I can get the income, it helps me keep my property beautiful and pay my bills. So I just wanted to share that. So again, if we go up with taxes, and then how do you tax me if I have one property that's my rental and the other one's my home? How does that get property? It's one unit. So I just wanted to share my perspective. And I don't mind paying what's due. I do pay. I pay all my taxes. I don't mind because I know it's income. But again, the more it goes up, the less people will rent. The less people will come to town. We also have a place in Florida, that we rent out there as income, and we pay all the dues and everything that's there that's needed, and there's no problem with that. I think there's things that you can watch. There's a lot of agencies that manage businesses, and I would think that they need to be paying taxes. I think that that's important, but I mean, there's no reason I couldn't show anybody that registers their property to come in and show you their taxes and say, hey, this is what I pay, and make sure you're getting your fair share, because I do believe that's very important, and I think the state should work, more diligently on that. So that's just my perspective as an Airbnb owner. I would love to continue doing it for the community, for my income, to keep my home. But there does get to a plateau where you can't afford it either. I'm at the max that I can charge people to come to Middletown for a 5-star property. I'm an Airbnb Plus. And I'm at the maximum level, which is $250 a night. And I pay taxes on that. And it's a beautiful property. I couldn't go up from that.
Airbnb charges you the state tax, right? You
7% and 1%.
Correct, you remit that to Airbnb.
They actually, yeah,
But
exactly.
you wanna know what, if we ask for that information, we can't get it, Mr. President.
Yeah, so how come we can't, as Middletown owners, tell you what we're
You
paying?
can if you register.
Which I am.
Right, but what
Yep.
I'm saying is.
They won't provide it.
Right. Airbnb will not provide the information to the state of Rhode Island
Yeah.
about who's paying the taxes, and that's what,
Oh, they are, yeah, I pay them, they pay you.
right.
'Cause I
You don't-
pay
You
them.
can't get that information.
So,
That's the big problem in Newport, and
so we get a statement, I get a yearly statement from Airbnb that shows what I've paid.
right.
So why couldn't we send that to,
You could,
right?
you could.
Why couldn't everybody that registers, part of registration, supply you with the year-end tax summary from Airbnb?
It's good for the people that register. We're
The ones that
trying to
don't are
find
the
the ones
issue.
who don't. And one last thing, and then I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing it right. The problem we have when it comes to the quality of the life issues are the absentee landlords that aren't here, that don't know what's going on their property,
Mm.
and it's causing problems in the neighborhoods. That's a real problem, and that's a stickler for me.
Mm.
I think we need to identify the absentee landlords. They need to pay when we have problems with their property.
Right, so there are a lot of management companies. You know, actually, I know one that's been,
Try to get one at 2:00 in the morning when you got a loud party going.
Right.
Cops are at the house.
yeah.
That's the problem.
But I think those management companies are the ones then have to be responsible. I mean, in Florida, there's tons of management companies, but they're all registered.
It all comes back to the owner. It's gotta go back to the owner.
I agree, but if the management company is the one that's managing it, they have to be responsible, and they get charged the tax that then they will charge the owner. That's how that will work as well. But, I mean, there's ways to patrol it. I mean, even in the community, I think that people know whose homes are up for Airbnb. You know?
I was a cop in Newport. We went from party house to party house. It's hard to control. Trust
Council
me.
Toronto?
Yes, I looked into some of those facts in regards to number of calls that have happened to Airbnbs in the summertime, and I think we should look at those numbers, because I don't think they're as high as we think they are. I agree, people are maxed out on what they can charge on off-season. There's only a certain amount of rents coming in, and they are people from St. George's or the military that come in, and actually, again, I have a rental property. And I too, use it I want to hold on to it, it's an investment, I've owned it for 20 years, I don't want to surrender it to somebody from out of state, and so I want to keep it, and I'm
Right.
renting it, and I actually, it's hard to match it, because it is an investment for me, and so it actually made more sense to do Airbnb / short-term rentals, because it was able to generate a little bit more revenue to take on the 7% tax increase the state put on it. And the 1% tax they put on it again to 8%. And then the $50 a year I have to pay the town of Middletown for every room in my house. And the extreme taxes I pay on my house. So all that goes into the downside and maintaining my property and all that, okay? So, and registering it.
Right.
And when you put a tax in place, it has to be enforceable, right? It has to be fair and it has to be enforceable. We have to be able to put it in place and make sure that it pertains to everybody. And I think that's the thing we have a problem in this town, is that we don't enforce the taxes that we have today.
And that's where we need to start.
The people who raise their hands are the people who get taxed. I'm doing it
Yeah.
over here, thank you, we're gonna levy more taxes.
Right.
And there are people who don't register because they can't afford to pay the taxes, or they don't want to pay the taxes, they don't think it's fair, whatever they are. So I'm just, again, speaking, I'm weighing on the other side of, why, we want to increase the tax because it's a business. Well, we're trying to increase the revenue, and they're saying that we're going to take that money and actually lessen the burden on the people who are living here full-time, because we'll get more money from these people, and we'll be able to put it over here if they don't spend it somewhere else. And I think there's actually people, and I've heard this at MEDAC, that are wanting to increase a tax to de-incent people from doing Airbnbs. I didn't
Yeah, I
even
think
think of
that's a
that,
mistake.
right? At first, I was like,
Absolutely.
wait a minute. That if we raise the tax high enough, we'll have less people doing it. I thought, wow, well, how would that have an effect? People would have to move out. They'll say, I'm not gonna do this any longer. Forget it, I'm out. And then there's people, you know, who raise the taxes. And then people who will buy the house and not rent it. And we'll have a neighborhood like we have over on Easton's Point, and it's going across the street, and it's going into our other neighborhoods, just be dark houses.
Yeah.
That's
a
what
lot
I
of
think.
those.
That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
I'm not speaking for anybody else. This is what I hear, this is what I see, and I'm voicing the opinion of the people. Those are the side effects, the unintentional consequences of putting something in place if you don't do your homework. So these aren't you know, it's well known that we've been looking at tax reform for a long time here, so I hope we don't rush into anything. So thank you for speaking.
Yeah, I just think it's important that you just hear somebody in the community that, you know, it's an important income for me. And again, just putting more taxes on it makes it more difficult for people to want to rent. There's a plateau.
And that's why we're here today.
Yeah.
That's why we're here.
So I would
We're not
be
making any decisions here today.
right. This is just gathering information,
Gathering
and that's why I
information.
came, because I was very interested in learning more to understand and how, you know, I would be more than happy to have other conversations, because this is important to me in my livelihood, you know, and for us to stay in Middletown and to keep this home for my children one day. That's very important to me. And that's one of the biggest reasons I do this. You know, my dad is in every single room of this house. And I would love for you to drive by this home, because you will have seen how it's evolved since I bought it 13, 14 years ago. So,
Well,
anyway.
thank you.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you for
Thank you,
coming
Mrs.
today,
Dixon.
too.
Thank
I
you.
have a
Thank you.
question.
Yes.
Councilor Santos.
You say you want to leave your home to your children.
Correct.
Do your children own their own homes at the present time?
They do. They own one together.
Okay, so down the road, if they inherit this home, what are they going to do with it? Sell it?
No, they will absolutely not. They were raised in this as children every summer. Their lifetime summer memories are here, as mine were as a child.
So they would continue to live in their present home that they are now.
Oh, I don't know what they'll do then. They're only 26.
Okay, let's assume. And they rent this property out. Now, I have two sons, both of them own their own home.
Mm-hmm.
What are they going to do with my home when I kick the bucket?
I have no idea.
So they'll probably rent it out.
No idea. I really can't speak for them because that's pretty far down the road. I do know that they love this home. All their memories are there with their friends who also live nearby. All their parents live nearby. And we have this community of children that were raised together here at the beach surfing. And they all come for holidays and spend summer vacations together. So I'm not quite sure. I do know that they want to have this home to raise their children in it like they were raised every summer. That's the best I can tell you.
Okay, thank you for answering my question.
Surely.
It'd be nice if she has the option to do that, and the kids have the option to move into that house. There might be a situation where they don't even have that option.
Sure.
True?
Yeah, there's a lot of variables, and that's why we're here today.
It's 90 days.
Is there anyone else in the audience that'd like to come up? Lawrence Frank, come on up.
A couple of comments. First of all, the real estate investors, the woman who just spoke, Mr. Toronto and others, while concerned about the tax burdens that might be applied to their properties, we have not heard from them about the tax advantages that are applied to their properties by renting or allowing their properties to be used to generate income. The question is, with an increase in the tax rate from the residential to commercial, what would be the net effect in dollars, say on a $400,000 house? What would be the annual income they got now from the rental of those properties, and what effect would that have on the ultimate income that they receive for that year? Second, my proposal regarding the $1 room tax to be applied for public safety. I would like the town to have a full discussion about this, and if they feel that they are in favor of it, then I'd like them to address that to our state reps to make sure it happens. Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Toronto?
Yes, I can answer that question in regards to the benefits of having a rental property.
Good.
It's probably one of the only tax breaks that the government gives you in regards to rental property. I learned this from my family, okay, and looking at taxes. And I don't know too many people who like to pay taxes. There are a few people who have come up to me and said, I like paying taxes. I said, well, pay more. If you like paying taxes, feel free to write a check to the town, okay? I put that out there for everybody. But recently, there's tax changes that have taken place, and they're constantly taking in the interest that you can write off on your loans for a rental property, the amount you pay in taxes to the state and to the federal in regards to that income that's coming in off of that property. So it is like a business, and you do need to run it, you know, and see if it makes financial sense to hold on to that property, including the emotional attachment you might have with it, which might be priceless. So you do everything you can to hold on to it, and you do what you can to do it. But there are people that are not able to continue to live in this town of Middletown because the job situations in Rhode Island, jobs, affordability, it's a fact. Rick was just quoting stats that prove that this state is the worst state to live in. I hate saying that, but it is. It's like number 48 in regards to retirement. So we've got other issues that rather than trying to tax people, we've got to find ways to help them stay in their home. So if I'm looking forward to the conversation that if we do say we want to raise it to commercial, if we can talk with Peter to say if we can actually say a residential property is now commercial, does that mean that they can rent it or open up a burger shop? So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I look forward to hearing about that. Is that spot zoning that you're just saying, hey? And how do you enforce if they were there 1 day, 30 days, 90 days? We don't know that today. We do not know who's renting and who's not renting. And in MEDAC, we had conversations about what would, Bob's ideas would make it a lot simpler to enforce if you just said it's on rental properties. But if you then say, no, it's only going to be people who are short-term and you start moving it around, it can be a little bit hard to maintain. So, again, I appreciate this day because it's tax reform, and I think it's really great, Bob. And so, again, I'm kind of holding the line to say, how's this going to help our seniors and our veterans and our long-term residents keep Middletown affordable and try to make it a little bit more predictable and more business-friendly? That's what I want to hear. That's what I'm hoping to hear today.
Yeah, all points, great points, and that's why we're here.
Could I just say one thing in response to Mr. Toronto?
Go ahead.
The reason people are being forced, one of the reasons people are being forced out of their homes is because the prices of homes are going up. And one of the reasons prices of homes are going up is because there are real estate investors who are more interested in purchasing homes to generate income than actually letting people be able to buy homes that are affordable. If there's a less demand for Airbnb type rentals, there will be less demand for properties in general, and the prices of houses will become more affordable. And that's the issue here. The issue is how do you constrain the increase in property values? And part of the way you do that is eliminate the demand for Airbnb type rentals, particularly for out-of-state or non-resident homeowners.
And I appreciate that. I agree that there's a segment of the market that does that, but I believe there's a bigger segment of the market that does it for other reasons as well. So again, if you're going to put something in place, you got to understand the consequences it has on everybody, not just these people that you believe that are coming in and buying this up. And this is a nationwide thing. It's not just Rhode Island, it's California, it's Florida, it's nationwide. URI's done a big study on this. So it's something that needs to be vetted out and understand the full consequences of it. I proposed a few changes to the tax methodology we have. We sent it to RIPEC. It was there for 15 months. So I hope we do as much due diligence. I do want tax reform. I want to help people stay in their homes. And so I'm excited for today, really am. So thank you for coming.
Julie.
I think another point is that I want to bring up, so people leave here today that don't think anybody's minds are made up. Again, this is, we're vetting it. We're here today to solicit information, solicit the feelings from the public in regards to that. We've always been a council, at least the years that I've sat up here, that we've always tried to solicit as much information and hold public forums to get information. There's pros and cons to everything. You know, I just did some fast math on a home that I own in Middletown, and I said, I was comparing what you were saying you were renting your Airbnb for, $250 a day, and you know, and I have a home in Middletown that I would say is probably worth $400,000 easy that I lease out long term, and I get a little less than $50 a day. Okay, so it's you know, I guess it depends on who you are and what position in life you are. But we have to do something that has to be equitable to everybody across the board. And that, at the end of the day, that's what I will lean, that I will vote for, something that there's always somebody that it doesn't fit, the round peg doesn't fit into the square hole. But I think for the most part, we need to look at it and say, generally speaking, what is a fair process for everyone? And I think a lot of times that, you know, Airbnb, who I'm not anti of, you know, it's a business and it's a very lucrative business. And I think it's something that I think, and I agree with what Councilor Toronto said earlier. I think it's, you know, the residual effect in the neighborhoods is moving, and it can move, but maybe we should start limiting those, what we're gonna have in the town. There's a lot of things that should be taken into consideration down the road when we're looking at the overall thing, but we have to remind and keep reminding ourselves, what's the financial state? Our solvency in the town of Middletown is excellent right now. We wanna maintain that solvency. And how do we do that? When we have a declining population that's getting older. And those are the things we have to consider. So we'll take those into considerations, and we have some more people. Mr. Viveras, former Councilor Viveras, wants to talk, and it's been a while since I've seen you stand at that podium, so welcome, Mr. Viveras. Name and address, please.
Anton Viveras, 110 Indian Hill Road. Thank you, Mr. President, members of the council. I read in the paper and I hear said that we want affordability. We want to help our seniors and those on fixed income to stay in their homes. We want to attract younger people, and we want to keep the younger people here once they inherit their homes. How do you do that when every 3 years you have revaluation and the assessment goes through the roof? Personally, at the last revaluation, my tax bill would have increased $647. But because the town lowered the tax rate $1.62 or $3, it went up $127.
Being clear, the mill rate was the same, the evaluation raised your taxes.
Let me repeat myself. During the revaluation, if the mill rate had not changed, my tax bill was going up $647.
I just want to make sure everybody understands.
But because the town lowered the tax rate, which is almost unheard of, $1.62 a thousand, it dropped to $127. Now, how many revaluations could I afford a $647 increase when my wife and I are retired and on fixed income?
If that would have happened.
It would have happened.
But it didn't happen. Understood. I just want to, Mr. Viveras.
Because I don't want to argue.
No, I'm not arguing with you. I just want you to be clear when you make these statements, because if I'm having trouble understanding it, I just want to make sure that everybody understands that, yes, it would have been $600 some odd dollars, but it didn't because the mill rate went down instead of up.
Well, how do you prevent that from happening?
Okay?
You take the assessment of people's property off the market value of the house. You set their assessment at what it is as of December 31st, 2019, and only allow it to increase a maximum of 3%. CPI with a maximum of 3%. You had that proposal before you. In the proposal, it was 2%. increase. With the information that we received from RIPEC, which you received, okay, turns out the last 10 years, the increase averaged $2.1%. So we said 3% should cover it. If you need more than that, you have to go to a financial town meeting and the people would vote on it. So if you get off of the market value, assessing property at the market value, that stops the big increase. Market value can go up, but as of the end of last year, assessment will only increase 3%. Now, Mr. Brown and the solicitor put in the CPI. Again, CPI with a cap of 3%. If the CPI was 2% and you needed 3%, then you could raise the mill rate 1% to make up the difference. But together, it wouldn't go over 3%. This would afford people who are on fixed income to be able to figure out what their taxes are going to be 10 years down the road by simply taking their assessment at the end of last year and figuring a 3% increase for the next 10 years. And 10 years, you know exactly what you're going to be paying. Now, when I leave at present, if I leave my house to my children, if the house doesn't get reassessed at that point, they inherit it at the same rate that I was paying. Okay. The next revaluation, and if it happens like it did the last one, their taxes are going to go up $647. So even if you could afford to move in, eventually, you're not going to be able to afford it. Pretty soon, on the present system, and the state's not going to change the system. That's for darn sure. Okay? They went from 10 years to 3 years because certain cities and towns needed more money. They had the most people on the General Assembly, and they voted to lower it to 3% so that every 3 years they can get the money from the people. And who suffers? The town, the little guy, all the time. So I urge you to take a look at what you had. RIPEC, at some $19,000, gave 3 scenarios. The first 2 was with the 2% cap. The third said if you remove the cap, it worked. And in that, it did not depend on the market value of the house. So I'm asking the council, look at what you had with a 3% increase. Matter of fact, if you come to the fire station Monday, okay, I'll make a presentation so you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I think I've heard your presentation on several occasions.
Well,
But the first time I heard it, it was 2%. The problem I had, and I have the same problem now as I had before, is I'm not in favor of having a financial town meeting. Okay, I think those have been failures in other cities and towns. I think they create chaos, they create animosity, and a lot of times people weigh in worrying about their own personal pocketbook than they are every resident in the town. And that's what it stops with me. And that's why I tap the brakes on that. Because we, as a council, you sat up here, we have to look across the board what's fair to everyone in town. Not a select group of people, not how it's gonna affect certain areas of our town. And, financial town meetings, and I've seen them, and I've witnessed them. I can remember, I was in attendance one time in a city in our county, a town in our county, and it was nothing but chaos. A good friend of mine was chairing that meeting that night, and I went there, and he told me, you wanna see a show, come here, and it was a show. It was a show. And I'll tell you something, I can't see that working anyplace. People get elected to sit in these seats. They get elected to sit in these seats because their constituents believe in what they assume or suspect they're gonna do. And I think historically, and you've been part of our councils, that we have to look across the board. We have to be fair with everybody in town, not selecting. My problem also is if you maintain your house, and you pass it on down to other people, and it stays at a fixed, let's say a fixed tax rate, because that's what it comes down to, a fixed tax rate that can only waffle a little bit. What happens to the person that buys a house next door to you? How do we solicit people into town when they're gonna buy a house next door to you, and they could be, in 10 years from now, be paying double or triple the taxes?
Well, maybe they should have moved into Middletown 10 or 15 years ago when the prices were. How do you reduce the price of property? How can you take a property that's worth $40,000 and somebody wants to move in and but can't afford $40,000? So you sell it to them at $300,000. You can't reduce the cost. You have to say, when you buy it, that's your starting point. When we bought our house, that was our starting point. And then it went up. Okay, you don't touch, if 3% increase in the assessment brings in the money that the town needs, you don't have to touch the tax rate, okay? If the CPI...
So you're saying increase the mill rate by 3%?
No, what I'm saying is, the asset of the property is assessed at the end of last year. That figure can only increase
3%.
3%. Now, you said fairly, that's everybody. Whether my house is 400, 800, or 1.2 million, it's going up 3%.
What happens to the person, and let's be fair here now, and I know you're a fair person because I've known you long enough, okay? What about the person that can't afford, that's on a fixed income, cannot afford to maintain their property like they would like to, and the evaluation goes down? They're gonna have to pay 3% more, even though their property may get evaluated at less than it was worth the prior evaluation.
If their property, okay, you're using your scenario, in, let's say, 8 years, their property increases market value $200,000. But they're not paying taxes on that because you're paying on the assessment that went up 3% over the 10 years, okay? Now you have a downturn. The market value of the house went up $200,000. You have a downturn. Their market value drops $100,000. They pay taxes at what they were paying at that time. Because as the market value was going up $50,000, $60,000, $80,000, $100,000 a year, they weren't paying they weren't paying taxes on that anymore. They were paying taxes on a $400,000 increase, 3% a year for those 10 years. So for those 10 years, they saved money. When the market value drops, unless it drops so dramatically that it goes below what they're paying, then they'd be paying more taxes than what the market would do. The whole thing with this 3%, with this 3-year, was when the year, if you go back, the year that we had a recession and the property values dropped, that was a revaluation year. So people's valuation went down, the state and towns and cities got less money, so what are we going to do? Well, let's change it, and we'll go 3 years. So in 3 years, they recovered that money
Yes,
that they lost.
I agree with you.
Okay. So what I'm saying is, if you treat everybody the same, 3% across the board, increase, no matter what your property is worth. If my property is worth 3 times what yours is, my tax bill is going up 3 times more than yours is.
Let me just say this, because there's other councils that want to
Okay.
ask you some questions, but here's where I don't think it's right. Because there are certain homes in certain areas that can go up 10 or 12%, have an increase in property value. And there's other areas that can go down 4 and 5%. So to say 3% across the board, what do you do with the person that is really struggling and their property value is less than it was 3 years prior to that, and it goes down, and you're asking them to pay a 3% increase? This is where I lose it. But I'm gonna let Council Von Villas ask you a couple
Well,
questions.
no, I didn't want to
Council.
ask a question. I want to make a statement.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I believe this council
addressed the issue of the tax proposal a while ago and rejected that proposal. So I don't see beating it to death is going to do any good. Second thing I'd like to say is that we've spent a lot of time talking about short-term rentals and issues related to that. But it seems to me that both of those issues are things that would consume a lot of time before we would ever come to any kind of resolution. But at the very top of the memo that came from MEDAC is the reference to the homestead exemption. And I do think that that is something that we could do, we could address very quickly. And I would like to hear some conversation about that, because that's not something that will go on for a year and a half or whatever. It's been brought forward before, and I think we could possibly, conceivably, resolve something like that in a couple of months.
I agree.
Where other stuff that we're talking about here will go on forever as far as that goes. So please, could you just maybe redirect a little to the homestead exemption?
No, I can address that. The homestead that was proposed does not treat everybody equally. You qualify for the exemption, you get a 2.7% reduction. If you don't, you get a 2.3% increase, and all the businesses who's going to pass that increase on to their customers, the people who buy whatever from them, who are on fixed income, going to have to pay more for that particular item. So that doesn't treat everybody fairly. Florida, if you live in Florida, you're a full-time resident, and you qualify for the exemption, you get the exemption off the top. And they don't look at it every year. So this year you get 7.2, next year you're sorry, we need the money, you get 0. That's not predictable, it's not fair, it's not equal across the board. What was proposed to you was everybody gets treated the same. My taxes go up twice as much as somebody whose property is assessed at half of what mine is.
So Anton, so if we did the homestead and we put a fixed rate in there, 3%, 5%, whatever, fixed, it doesn't fluctuate. There could be a mechanism built in where a council could change it, but you can't change it every year. Maybe every 3 years you reevaluate it, maybe every 5 years you reevaluate it, maybe you change it. That's more fair, that's predictable. They're gonna know. It's 3%, it's 5%. You're gonna get that off the top, like you're saying, off the top, right off the top. That's your 3%, 5%, whatever it is. And you build into the ordinance that every 4 years or 5 years, the council can reevaluate it.
That makes it unpredictable.
That's-
Right
no,
there,
that is
right there
predictable.
makes it unpredictable. You
No,
said
that's
every
fine.
4 years. How do I
Well,
say
you
4
don't-
years from now,
in 4
what's it
years,
gonna cost
It
me?
may not change, Anton, but the town has to
It
be
may
able-
not.
But here's
May.
what I'm saying. If the economy changes, if something goes bad, at least the council has an opportunity to say, we need to fix it. We need to change it. You could build in safeguards and safety valves where a council's just not gonna change it on a whim.
what?
You could change it based on the needs of the town.
You know
But
what?
you don't do it every year.
If something isn't written in stone, as far as I'm concerned,
Saying you put it
as
in an
far
ordinance.
as government's concerned, because you people may have all the good intentions, but who follows you? So if it isn't written in stone,
And what I just
okay,
said.
you
what I-
can't say it's
Not to
predictable.
interrupt you, but what I just said was, you build in safety valves so that a council can't just, on a whim, say, we're gonna reduce it to 2%, we're gonna do 1%, we're gonna do 0. Or you're gonna increase it. But you do whatever you need to do. But you base it, you have to have some type of a way to change it based on the needs of the town.
Will
You
whatever,
might have to.
will whatever you do go before the people as a charter amendment? Because if it doesn't, you can change it anyway. As the solicitor has said, you make the ordinances and you can amend them and repeal them. If you want, talk that, you make it as a charter amendment, let the people vote on it, put it in the charter. Therefore, if you want to change it, it has to be an amendment, go before the people so they can approve the amendment. The council, any council, will not be able to do it on their own. Put it in the charter. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Does
you
anybody
very
else like to
much.
make any comment? Come on up. Just your name again, please, and address.
Kate Texera, 1372 Wapping. I just wanted to share a couple of pieces of information. I know this gentleman here mentioned that the real estate in Middletown is through the roof, the cost to buy a property, right? But that's everywhere. I mean, it's the same anywhere in the country right now. It's not just Middletown.
Same anywhere in the country.
Pardon me?
It's not the same anywhere in the country. The house prices in this island, you go across the bridge, and the same house that you could buy here for 450,000, people are buying over there for 275. Go across the bridge.
Okay.
I know people that do it.
Okay.
They can't afford to live in this town.
The town, there's a lot of taxes. I mean, a lot of my guests will say they won't buy here because it's too expensive to live.
Through the roof on this island.
But it's, I mean, it's expensive everywhere, even in Bristol.
But young families, I was born and raised in Bristol.
Yeah.
Young families
We were too.
cannot afford to live here. I mentioned this at another council meeting. Young fellow works up where I work. He works on the grounds crew. Makes pretty good money. Family was raised here, 3 generations. He wanted to live here. He went to the Middletown schools. He graduated from here. He could not find a starter home in Middletown. He couldn't find one on the island. He moved to North Kingston. Young people cannot afford to live on this island. The prices are not the same in this country. You go down to South Carolina, you go down to the Carolinas, you go down to Florida, you can get more money, more bang for your buck down there than you can get here, depending on where you are. If you're on
Yeah,
the coast,
depending where,
if you're on the coast. But I'm telling you,
yeah,
I've seen it.
okay.
It's not the
So
same.
the second thing that I wanted to share is that, speaking back to the homestead, Airbnb, from what I understand, will not put a property on if it's homesteaded. So I don't know if you've done any research on that, but if we did put into play people that are living in their homes and they're here in Middletown, it would eliminate those properties from being also on Airbnbs, and just an opportunity to control and put things in place. So there is a probability of looking into that further and then applying that. So I just wanted to share that with you. And we know that because of Florida, there's a property there, and it is on Airbnb. We have other friends that have homesteads, and they can't put them on Airbnb. So just wanted to share it.
Not that they can't rent them, though.
No, but that's where the majority of the business drives from.
But there's a lot of repeat business, too.
Yeah,
They don't go through
I would agree with you on that, but I just wanted to
If it's-
throw that out there.
For me, if there's a choice between Airbnb and a choice between putting a homestead in, I'm putting the homestead in.
Oh.
I'm gonna vote for that in a heartbeat. I'm
Yeah,
not worried about the Airbnbs.
yeah, I'm just saying, when there was the conversation about how do we control and how do we see who has
Get
them,
some long-term rentals out of it.
you know.
which
But I
we-
think the homestead is a great
Yeah.
idea, that, as you had mentioned, we can get that in action right away.
Exactly. Anybody like to make any comments, additional comments in regards to, let's say, homestead?
I do.
Councilor Toronto?
So, homestead is, you know, we're on the tax exploration committee. We looked at a number of different methods that other states are using to have tax reform, is what I refer to it as. And looking at, again, seniors and veterans, we have an exemption for them in our current tax methodology. We basically have a column that says, if you're a senior or you're a veteran, you get a certain amount off your assessed value for taxes, which in essence lowers your taxes. Homestead would address full-time residents, people that would be here year-round. There's a calling for people. People say to us all the time, where's the break for the people who live here year-round? So I think a homestead kind of addresses that. It says, hey, you live here full-time, year-round, pay taxes in Rhode Island, pay taxes in Middletown, you're gonna get a tax break. Just like a senior citizen would get it, we implement it the same way for a homestead. Narragansett did it. They have a variable, they say we'll give 10% off, but every year they decide what it's going to be. So now you don't have predictability. So my 3 things for today were seniors and veterans, and I'm proposing that we double their exemption. The homestead is something that we talked about, I think is a leg of the stool that will help full-time residents, but to help everybody across the board, you have to fix when we reassess people for tax reasons, for the tax purpose. The state of Rhode Island used to only do reassessments every 10 years. If we could turn the hands at the clock, if I propose that the town of Middletown doesn't reassess people's taxes, their tax assessment value, do it once every 10 years. That's it. Just like it used to be. We just go and say, we're gonna assess it, let's assess it, and we're not gonna change it for 10 years. Even though the state's gonna want us to do a reassessment every 3 years, so they can see what the value of our property is, which is like $3 billion right now, and probably 10 years from now it'll be $6 billion. Okay? But now that gives predictability. That ties people to what the town needs, not who moves in next door. If an Airbnb moves in next door, they buy it for $1 million, they're gonna be taxed at $1 million. The person living next door, who's been there for 20 years, is gonna pay taxes on what they are paying taxes on and what the town needs, not the $1 million home that was just put up next door. That's predictability. And the only way of having predictability is the way we tax 2 out of the 3 years right now. We don't change people's assessments. Even though the market's going up and down, we're not changing it. It's that 3rd year that we start shifting the financial burden. So the changes we wanted to make, they started saying, well, that's going to shift the tax burden from the wealthy to the not so wealthy, is the way it was quoted in the RIPEC document. Well, today, we take the financial burden and we said we could reverse that and say we take the money from the wealthy and we redistribute it to the not so wealthy. I mean, it's just words. Reality is that the tax burden is already shared at the initial value of their property. We did a number, we ran the number, and if we raise people's taxes no more than 3% in a year, and you knew your taxes weren't going to go up more than 3% in the next 10 years, a person who's paying $3,000 in taxes, if you go 3%, that'll be $3,060. The next year after that, it'll be $3,120. And after that, so 10 years it'll go like that, and then that person's gonna end up spending about $36,000 in taxes in 10 years, the total commitment to the town. Someone who lives in a $1 million home is gonna pay about $300,000 in taxes. So $300,000, $36,000, same service. When is enough enough? We're not shifting the financial burden because they know their taxes are gonna go up no more than 3%. And theirs isn't gonna go up any more than 3%. How can that be any more fair? Today it's not fair. People's taxes are going up 16%, and some neighborhoods are going down 5%. How can that be fair? George, is that a fact? Does that actually happen where people's taxes went up 16% and some people's taxes went down?
George, could you come to the mic, please? Thank you.
I would say yes. Some people's taxes went up 15 or 16%.
Right.
And on the floor, 5 might be, yeah, that could be. I'm not exactly sure of it.
The last
So, can I just ask, those scenarios, what are those scenarios, though? I mean, it's sort of a yes or no question, but what scenario is it when someone's taxes go up 15% versus someone goes down 5%?
When the value of the property increased substantially from the prior year. And in the case where the assessment went down, that would be more a benefit of the tax rate going down. The values themselves could have gone up 2 or 3%.
Sure.
But because the tax rate went down, they're paying less in taxes.
So the current system today, the way it works, the last time the town had no additional levy on the residents for taxes, we were balanced. So in a year that we didn't do a reevaluation, no one's taxes would have went up. which happened 2 years. We did it. No one's taxes went up. But because we did the reassessment, some people's taxes, property values went up 25%. Some people's taxes, assessment went up 5%, depending on the neighborhood you were in. What was hot, what was not. But because the total value of all the real estate in Middletown went up so high, we had to move the mill rate down, right? Because we would have collected too much money. We had to move the mill rate down, and it came down like 9%. So the person who was gonna pay 26% more in taxes, it went down to 17. But the person whose house only went up 5% got a 4% decrease in their taxes for the same service. Just another day on the clock turned. Your taxes are gonna go down, your taxes are gonna go up because Dennis's house didn't appreciate as much as yours. Is that fair to say, George? Kind of how that worked? They got a tax decrease because their house didn't appreciate as much as this house.
Coupled with the drop in the tax rate, yeah.
So we raised this person's taxes to offset this person's tax decrease because their value of their house didn't increase by the same percentage. This person became paper richer. They didn't get any more money, they just became paper richer because we believe their houses, based on vision appraisal, based on all the information we have, that their value, they're richer people because they're on paper. But this still went down, even though the town didn't need any additional dollars. So if we don't reassess people for the next 10 years, we just locked them in today and said, next 10 years, no, we're not gonna listen, we're not changing what we're gonna assess people. If we raise the taxes 1%, 2%, or 3%, everybody goes up that amount. So the person who's paying $3,000 in taxes, if we went up 1%, would pay $3,030. The person that's paying $10,000 in taxes will pay $10,300, or $10,100. Very predictable. Everyone pays their fair share. You're already paying a lot because you live in a bigger house and a nicer house according to vision appraisal. So the variance is there. So again, I think Homestead is I like Homestead. I got a lot of people who ask me for that. That'll help the people who are here year round. I think it's great. I think we need to explore that. I think that seniors and veterans, I think we should increase that. I like the tax freeze. We should look at that. And I really think that we should look at not reassessing people's properties for tax purposes once every 10 years would be good.
We don't dictate that though, correct, George?
Correct?
We don't dictate when the houses are reevaluated.
No, it's a
state-driven.
state mandate.
State-driven.
But we could make a decision not to affect the tax assessment value of someone's property. So the state says, you gotta reassess everybody's property every 3 years, so we do it. They come back, they say, okay, Dennis, your property is $500,000. We now say it's worth 600, change the market to 600, we report that to the state, but your tax, it doesn't change, your assessment, tax assessment value. Can we do that?
I think we would need legislation. I've never heard of that being done. I think that's a question for Peter.
I don't think we can.
I don't think
We
you
could
need
pass legislation that says that we do not reassess, we proposed it, that was Prop 13, that was Model 3. We don't change the people's assessments. That was Model 3 of the RIPEC document. If we don't change people's assessments and we just raise taxes based on moving the mill rate, it would fund the town. And that's why we would have to go to the General Assembly and say, we would like to make a change. We don't want to reassess people's their tax assessment until it sells. That's what we said, we triggered it. But why don't we just say, we'll just do it every 10 years. Then we don't have to worry about it for 10 years. You get hit, take your punishment, and then you know for the next 10 years, it's gonna be like what we do every 2 years now. We need money, we move the mill rate. Hopefully Middletown won't need to raise the mill rate. Hopefully everybody will have no tax increase for the next 10 years because we're gonna be so frugal. And we're gonna find other ways to raise money without taxing the residents. I know I'm just kidding, actually, there. So let's just all pay our fair share.
All right, before we're gonna obviously take a lunch break at 12 o'clock for about 20 minutes. But before we get there, we have Representative Ruggiero and Representative Corcoran here. Would either of you like to make any comments on what you heard this morning?
Thank you, George.
Thanks, George. We're going to do it together or independently?
I
Okay,
just
we'll do it
wanted,
together.
good morning, thank you. I'm Rep. Deb Ruggiero, my colleague Rep. Corcoran. I'm just thrilled that you're having this conversation, and it's a very robust discussion, and I agree with some of what's been said, Councilman Toronto, when you talk about doubling the exemption for seniors and also for veterans. The thought of the homestead exemption is really a very good idea for your full-time residents. I certainly hope that the council thinks about that. I can tell you personally, I have investment property on the east side of Providence, and they have a homestead exemption, and I do pay a higher rate because I rent that. I have property that I live in Jamestown and property that I rent in Jamestown, and at the end of the day, you know, we all have to pay our fair share of taxes. And as Mrs. Texera had pointed out in Florida, they have an ordinance that says that if you rent your home for more than 30 days, you lose the homestead exemption. So I believe there are ordinances and municipal opportunities for the council to really take a leadership role and do this in the next, months or years. Certainly from the state level, and we'll talk more Monday night on our legislative session, we are happy to help you in any way with legislation that helps the town. Because this is an issue not just on Aquidneck Island in Newport and in Middletown. It's happening in East Providence, it's happening in Warwick. It is a statewide issue. And I agree that Airbnb should send a list of people, but again, the town could even require through an ordinance, as Mrs. Texera said, she gets one sheet every year from Airbnb. So I applaud you very much for the conversation, and I want to thank all of the residents with their wonderful ideas to generate revenues, especially the commercial rate. But I will remind you that we have to be careful of what we pass statutorily, because there are 22 cities and towns in Rhode Island. Jamestown is one that does not have a commercial rate, because we're trying to be so business friendly. Everybody is taxed as a residential rate. So in talking with the League of Cities and Towns, Brian Daniels, and they have a wonderful white paper on their website on this Airbnb issue. And I've had deep conversations with Evan Smith from Discover Newport, and certainly with Paul Dion in revenue and in taxation on this issue. So I believe Airbnb, which started about 5 years ago, was a room-sharing business, and it has morphed into investors buying investment properties and making it into a business venture. So, we're spot on. We just have to find some resolutions. Rep?
You pretty much summed it up, so I don't disagree with anything Deb said, but I do have a question for Councilman Toronto. So if you froze and did the 10 years, and I have legislation in right now that Portsmouth had asked for and Bristol has asked for to just make sure that you wouldn't be in a position where you would have to assess more frequently than 3 years, because Portsmouth ended up in a situation like that. But if you did the 10 years, then when that 10-year rolled around, you could have a huge change. And isn't that the rationale for doing it every 3 years, is to kind of ameliorate, moderate those big changes, swings?
You say that, it's like, so what you're saying is, well, over time, the percentage increase in 10 years, the market, will continue to go up and down over this period of time, but my taxes would stay locked. I would know that I'm tied to what the town needs, which we do 2 out of 3 years
Right.
now, right?
Yes.
So my understanding of why they actually moved it, rather than doing it every 10 years, they did it every 3 years, is they wanted to be able to pick areas that they feel the wealth is moving to and then assess the tax sooner. Then they can't, every 10 years, they can't go after that neighborhood to say, well, that one's really heating up, so we could change the tax
Change
on
around.
this. And that's why they want to do it every year. I've heard legislators
I have heard
talking that they want
that.
to do it every year.
I've heard that too. I don't know that, I guess I wouldn't support
And so
that.
it makes taxes so unpredictable because your taxes now will be based on who moves in next door.
Right,
It's not what the town needs. Every year would be who moved in next door.
for the individual.
Where if it was every 10 years, you would know what your taxes are because it's based on what the town needs. That's the key.
Right. You
That's the
could,
key.
you could still see a big swing, though.
You
a-
would.
At the end of those.
But you get hit once. And then you'd
Right.
be good for another 10 years. So that'd be in my house 20 years and it would only be hit twice. Now, if it was a huge amount, which I think it may just ebb and flow, hopefully you'd have a recession the year they did it. Right?
Perhaps.
You'd be hoping for a recession.
Well, that would be,
Right?
and that's what happened in Portsmouth, actually, is that there was a recession in between, after
Right.
an
And they did reassess,
evaluation.
and this is a problem, because
Yeah.
this reassessment as a whole, there's other flaws in
Right.
that reassessment process. What happened was, that this was the tower, that they
You're
didn't
right.
reassess these people's properties, and that it was overassessed by $800,000, something along those lines, and they had to pay back $80,000
Because of a
taxes
recession.
because of the recession, and the town
Right.
didn't do it, so it's
Right.
like this whole reassessment process. We have another thing in our town, where you're supposed to go into everyone's home every 9 years to see what's actually there. And we only get into 60% of the homes. So if someone wanted to go out and try to figure out what's in those other 40% of the homes, there might be more tax revenue there.
It's true. Good
So
point.
just the whole process,
Okay.
but yes, it would have at that time frame, if there wasn't you would hope for a
Right.
recession, but if it was
But
a
if
hot
you were at
market,
the
it'd be
high, you'd
high.
wait for 10 years
But at least I
to,
lived in my house for 10 years before I get forced out.
Let me ask, can I ask a question of both of you?
Sure.
What are we doing on the state level in regards to the Airbnbs, to monitor them, to hold them more accountable?
There is some legislation, I know Rep. Carson has put in some bills around that to hold them more accountable. We're also working on a piece of legislation where we would like Airbnb to actually submit the names of people. I think we can require that, whether or not that happens, whether they comply, we have to wait and see. But I think, we're working on that. If your legal counsel is also interested in putting some ideas together on that, we'd be happy, to hold off and wait for you on that.
Well, don't wait for us. I mean, feel free
Okay,
to
then
go
we'll do
ahead
it.
and
Oh, well, I
enact
know
this,
we're
okay?
meeting Monday
Well,
night, so I
yeah.
wanted- I didn't
No,
know.
but what I'm saying, my question being this, I think on a state level, and especially with enabling legislation at your levels, that this would be something that you could also put into that, you could mandate penalties
Right.
across the board. So it's fair play across the board. I mean, independently, we can do that, but there's more power in a statewide initiative to do something like that than certainly it is locally.
And certainly, you're absolutely right, President Sylvia, to at least get the names and the numbers and the database is something that we can request, but at the same time, through an ordinance, you too could ask that within your community. Providence has a brand-new ordinance that they just put in last month, which requires homeowners to reside in the residences if they're going to rent any rooms. Because remember, as I said 5 years ago, Airbnb started as room sharing, which enabled homeowners to pay their taxes, to make some revenue. It does put more rooms on the market for tourism, which is a great thing on Aquidneck Island. So if you talk to Evan Smith, he'll tell you we're not opposed to it. We just trying to help municipalities get their arms around who is renting. Are investors coming in and taking affordable housing off the market, which is problematic for our young people? And how do we protect our seniors with exemptions, so, like a homestead exemption, so that they can pay less taxes? And then you have the quiet enjoyment. The home next to me in Jamestown, every other weekend, there were different cars. And I said to a friend of mine, wow, I don't know anybody in Canada. I don't know anybody in New York. Boy, that woman knows people from everywhere. I feel like I just don't have a lot of friends. And then my neighbor called me and said, are you aware she's renting it on Airbnb? I said, well, that explains everything, but the town 3 years ago thought about doing an ordinance, and they were so afraid of upsetting other neighbors. I met with my council. They're finally bringing it up again. But for 5 years, a lot of communities have just not done much of anything, and now they're saying, you know something, this is something that has to be addressed. You know, you saw it in New Jersey. They had a huge referendum because people were staying in New Jersey to get into Manhattan.
Just changed it.
And it changed. It changes the landscape. So we have been doing a real deep dive on getting the data, but as you know, you really can't do good policy without good data. And I just want to thank you and applaud you for having this conversation this morning with the residents, and thank everybody for their input. And, you know, we're here to help, to be part of your team to figure out how we can do it. Because you do want to protect the residents so that they have the quiet enjoyment of their own home, but also some people do need the extra income renting a room.
So with the exception of Rep. Carson, is there anything else going on at the state level with any other reps?
I would have
that
to
would-
check. I mean, there are 75, you know, different reps, and there's probably 2,000 pieces of legislation. So I could, you know, maybe track something and find out what else is there, but
But I see this as important. I see this important for a number of reasons,
Mm-hmm.
because with the rentals, with the short-term rentals, there's a lot of residual costs. There's law enforcement costs, there's neighborhood quality of life costs associated with this, and I think that we really got to get a grip on this for somehow.
you are
Because,
spot on.
You know, it's, you know, we just don't want to turn Middletown into a party town. You know, we don't want it to be New Jersey Shores or Newport Shores, or we want it to be, you know, we want people to be able to generate income, but we want it to generate income fairly.
Right.
And to do that, we have to really checks and balance on this. And I think without enabling legislation at the state level, we're not going to be able to enforce it.
Well, I think you should look at the Providence ordinance, because a lot of the ordinances are coming from municipalities, because every municipality, as I said, is so different. You know, there are 22 municipalities that don't even have a commercial tax rate. Newport does have one, Middletown has one, Portsmouth does not. So, I mean, you could determine within your own community, and I think that's better, because I'm not a big fan of the long reach of the government, the state government coming in and telling a city or town how they should govern. No one knows Middletown better than us. No one knows Portsmouth better than Portsmouth, right? So I'm happy in any way to support whatever you'd like to do, but at the end of the day, this is about the people of Middletown.
Understood, but at the same token, and I'll look at it like the $10 billion budget that they have in front of you, okay? Yeah, it could be an obvious source of revenue for the whole state if we policed companies and organizations like Airbnb a little bit more than we do, because it seems like we're just sloppy with them.
Well, the state's
seems
getting
like
their
we really
7%. Airbnb is paying the
only
state,
on the
so.
report, but only reported though.
Yeah,
Right.
8%, 7 plus 1.
They
One.
can't prove that.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you
1%
can't even
to the
prove
community.
it. We don't know if that's an accurate number or not.
You don't know, but it's
Don't
not.
disagree. Don't
not an
disagree.
Councilor Toronto.
So, I just want, when you pass a home exemption for the seniors and the veterans, and then you did a homestead, that's basically lowering the tax revenue on this population, right? Saying, okay, you guys are getting relief. That relief needs to be made up to balance. So the people who didn't qualify for any of the exemptions we set up, whether it be a homestead, senior, veteran, whatever,
Not a full-time resident.
right?
You're shifting the burden.
That tax burden is going over to the people who are doing the Airbnbs, and the people who are renting their properties.
Or the people
So by relieving it here, you're moving it over here, okay? And that's what we want to do, right? Because we're saying, and these people won't be taking more money out of their pockets because you're giving them a break off their assessed value. And these people are going to have to reach in their pockets and take out a little bit more, right? Because they're going to be at their assessed value. Mine's going to be an assessed, less homestead. Theirs is going to be assessed value.
That's right.
So they're going to be
You got it.
paying more.
You got it.
So if we keep giving more breaks here, then it's going to be put over here. So when you're thinking about doing this, I favor taking less out of their pockets and just having them pay at the assessed value. That, in essence, is the same as changing the commercial rate. It's the
that's-
same thing.
Right,
And it's a lot easier to administer. We don't have to
and that's
go and
something
figure
that
out everybody
Middletown
who
can
is-
do.
You
That's
can
in
just
your
say if
purview.
you're a homestead or you're a senior, then you're gonna get a reduction, and that means these people are gonna pay more.
Right.
We don't have to know what they're doing because they're gonna pay more.
So he's writing your ordinance.
Say we create an
Well,
ordinance.
we are, we're in the process of
Yeah,
doing that now.
I know you are. That's good.
And that's the fastest way.
Councilor Lombardi?
Thank you.
So,
Thank
Deb,
you.
I want to say, I'm not sure, when did we go from 10 years reval to the 3 years? Were you on a finance committee then?
Yeah, I think that was probably 4 or 5 years ago. I do recall that.
Was it that short a time?
I think it might be
Yeah.
longer than.
Maybe.
Why did
I don't, I'd have to find
why
out
did they go
exactly.
from one, because I know you got to know the rationale. Why do you go from one extreme to another? Why didn't they fall in the middle someplace, knowing that some of the things that Dennis is talking about are the unintended consequences, you know, of big fluctuations, you know? Come in the middle someplace, and maybe that's the answer. Maybe if you don't, you know, Dennis wants to go 10 years, the state certainly is probably not going to do that. The 3 years is too short a time.
So maybe we look at 5. You know, that's the whole idea of putting legislation in, and there's nothing that says we can't put it forward and say, why not do 5 years?
But could the town, so the town says we want to create, where we want it every 10 years. I don't care about the state as a whole.
Right, but I
Let's
think the
just say- but it's just
statute
Middletown.
is 3 years.
Can we go to the state and say, we've decided in Middletown that we're not going to change people's assessed values except once every 10 years? Is that something that we could propose to
If the council
state?
all agrees on that.
If we agree to it, you guys
and,
then would
you know-
get it and say, fine, Middletown can do that, right?
Well, if it's approved, sure.
We
It's
could
gonna
put
be
it in
enabling-
our
That's what we
charter.
decide.
It's going to be
We could
enabling
put it in our
legislation,
charter
right?
though, right?
Yeah.
Couldn't we put it in our charter?
But also, you know, the other question, which I think is what's being raised, is do we want to look at, we went from 10, you know, as I always say, the pendulum never swings in the middle, right? 10 years, 3 years. Do we put in a statute or a bill that says, is it 5 years? And is that something that, and I would talk to the League of Cities and Towns to also make sure that, you know, because it's not just one, we have 39 cities and towns.
So you're thinking statewide then?
If it's a bill that we put in that passes, it becomes statewide statute.
Statewide.
That's right.
It's statewide now.
I said we go 10.
You're really, what you're asking for is if Middletown can do it out on
If the
its
state
own.
had no appetite for it and said, no, we're not doing that. We
don't
want,
think we
whatever,
could.
we want to go, we're going the other way. We want to go every year.
We
That's
can
where they're going.
I would just
I'm
make
saying-
sure you do a fiscal note to ensure that the stability of the town can be sustained, you
It's,
know.
that was proven out.
That's, you
That
know,
was proven out. The RIPEC document proved out that if we
Mm-hmm.
held everyone's assessed value, not the cap, we had a cap.
Yeah.
At that point, it was 2. We realized that would put us
right.
we'd have to approve like the budget every year. But we averaged 2.1, so we said 3% cap. Now, that's just saying controlled spending in Middletown. That's all that was. Get rid of that. Model 3, get rid of the cap, no cap. That got rid of all the other issues of
just
things.
how- it's just
But
how you're
if
dividing it up.
if they left the assessment alone, everyone's assessment alone, and we gave them the ability to move the mill rate wherever it needed to be moved, it would fund the town. It was
At the end of
proven
the
by
day, we just want to say that we're glad to be here. We appreciate the conversation. We'll look forward to seeing you Monday night as we have our legislative conversation. And, you know, we're here to help, so let us know what you want to move forward with. And thank you again for doing this.
Oh, thank you
Thank
guys.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Thanks for what you guys do.
Okay, I'm gonna entertain a recess. Okay, motion to recess for about a half an hour. All in favor? Ladies and gentlemen, those of you that are here, if you want to stick around, we have some sandwiches coming in. I'm sure we have enough coming in to feed you, so, okay? Feel free to stick around. Mary Beth? Mary Beth? Okay, you want to start again? Okay, go ahead.
Motion to reconvene the meeting?
Second.
A motion and second to reconvene. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, is there, do we have anybody else in attendance that would like to make any additional comments today? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks, Mary Beth.
Thank you, Karen.
Thanks for lunch.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Thank you, Rick.
Well, we gotta stay. From here, I think we ought to,
Tone eating a sandwich.
gotta do it again. I'll tell you when, yeah.
Motion to close the public hearing?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, David, all set? It's a wrap. Okay. Good. Thank you, everybody.